Hi, so my name is Haley Castillo, and I am doing a case study for Fairbanks, Alaska on their food security. So, Alaska's food system is very dependent on imports. 95% of the foods are imported. That's because of failed agriculture expansion, limited routes for transportation makes things difficult for imports. If things can't get through, then people won't have food available. Harsh climates also make things very unreliable for imports as well as the agriculture. So with local agriculture, there has been a lack of agriculture expansion, and this is mainly due to harsher winters, and there's an expensive cost of living for plants and livestock, which makes it almost impossible for local farmers to get required resources. With high tunnels, I found that they could be very beneficial, and it's a new farming strategy that's been starting to be implemented in the US. And high tunnels are basically giant greenhouses, and in Alaska, in general, they can make high tunnels with layers, so that way the weather doesn't impact it as much. Distance is also a huge factor with our imports. It would be nice to be very self-reliant, but there are things that we just can't have in Alaska. So with distance, harsh weather conditions and limited routes make it very complicated and can be very unreliable when getting our imports. So I found that investing in alternative routes and modes of transportations would probably be the best thing to do for this. With alternative routes, this means making more roads, making different routes, and ways of getting to Fairbanks and from Fairbanks as well as other places in Alaska, because it makes a smaller chance for road closures in hazardous areas. Another thing that I also found would be having backup plans for transport, so not putting all your eggs in one basket. This would be putting some imports with flights and then have others be trucked up. And with this, there's less likely a chance that one or another is able to get you the supplies needed for living. So storage is very effective, especially in emergencies when food can't be brought or imports have to be canceled. It can get really tight, but individuals in Alaska I found are very well prepared for this. They use a lot of storage. They will buy food in bulk, and it has done an effective way of getting people through the winter. I also found that states, especially Alaska, has been investing more in community storage and getting food that is well contained and lasted in case of emergencies such as lack of imports. And this can be very useful because if maybe the individual is not as prepared as they thought, then the state and community will be able to provide. So the biggest gap that I found was with the high tunnels and new development. So I think that the high tunnels can be very effective, especially on the state of Alaska and Fairbanks as well. There are high tunnels that are used in Fairbanks. They're just not as large scale that would be needed to be more prosperous. But there's not a lot of research for Alaska since this is a new thing, which means that we haven't had time to see how effective a large-scale high tunnel would work and practice in Fairbanks and Alaska. So, in conclusion, the food system in Alaska is pretty unreliable, especially because we rely so heavily on imports. The high tunnels can be very effective, but there hasn't been enough research to prove that yet, but so far it seems that it will be able to provide food to the communities of Fairbanks and other cities in Alaska, as well as be able to counter those harsh climates and protect vegetation. Alternative routes and transportation would also be something to continue to invest in because it helps make imports more predictable and reliable because there's different ways to get your imports in, such as planes, trains, and trucks. Alternative routes also means adding more roads, making things easier to go around more hazardous areas, and making sure that individuals in Fairbanks continue to use storage and buy in bulk to make sure that they are prepared for in case food supplies are unable to provide. Citations.